Hey, this is Kip Weston. I've had a lifelong fascination with adventure, whether that's climbing, mountaineering, or diving deep into history. I'm obsessed with uncovering stories from extraordinary people who break from the average and become outliers. Now I want to share their stories with you. This episode, I'm speaking with Ryan Tilley. Ryan is a climbing YouTube legend. He has an incredible portfolio of in-depth climbing videos, and I mean in-depth. His videos are expertly researched and come from someone who's AMGA certified, so they're definitely worth a watch. In this podcast, we cover how he got started in YouTube, his thoughts on social media, and his plans for the channel. We also covered some of Ryan's thoughts on Alpine and rock guiding. I'm excited for you to hear more, so let's get into it. So, Ryan, I was just saying, it's so fun seeing your face and interacting with you because I'm so used to seeing you on my computer screen, but just with your YouTube videos. How long have you had that YouTube channel going?
Oh, I think since 2018, so like 6-ish years. Yeah, somewhere around 6-ish years now. And you can actually go back and to the very first videos and see those were even worse than my current videos now. But yeah, I've like gone through a loop now and I've started remaking some of the older videos that I wasn't happy with.
Yeah.
Or like didn't even have a tripod at that point.
Remember what inspired you to make that first video?
What did inspire me? I think at that time there was climbing content on YouTube, but not nearly as much as now. Actually, it nowadays you have a lot of different channels that talk about more or less the same thing and a lot of the same topics, but I felt like I really had to dig for it back when I was that age, which was like kind of coming out of college age. And I just like I had to dig for it, and then I started doing my own things, like with starting to get my SPI and all that stuff. So
The
I
single
thought
pitch
that,
instructor?
yeah, the single pitch
Yep.
instructor. And so I thought that it was like I could start making some of these things. And at the time I had a bit more of a grand plan with the channel of focusing more on adventure type videos and then having some instructional content in there. And so I just like went out climbing with my mom. We were just climbing a 3-pitch route and made like 4 videos, and mom recorded them. Of course, she
Yeah.
recorded with the phone vertical instead of horizontal. So we kind of learned about that
Front
whole
facing
deal.
camera. Like it's
Yep, yeah.
yeah.
So yeah, we learned about that, and I think I still have them up there where it's like the first few videos are vertical, like super, how it is, the vertical screen.
Yep.
And yeah, I just filmed a few of those so that way I could start experimenting with like making the channel and then putting them on YouTube. And that was kind of the start of it. I'm not a tech savvy person. Like that, I guess that should be obvious by now, but so it was a learning curve to just figure out how to like take the videos, put them in the editing software, figure out basic editing, which I'm still at that level now, and then figure out how to export them and then upload them to YouTube, and then like make an account and figure that whole thing out. And so those were kind of experimental videos, but I found out a system. I put together a system, and then I used that to just keep on making videos throughout the summer. Yeah, throughout that summer. And then that was also
Because
when
you
I
would do a
was
video a week, basically, right?
kind of, yeah. I mean,
More or less.
yeah, because in 2018 I graduated college, and then I took that summer off. I was working a job at Vertic World, the climbing gym, and I actually started working there when I was 14, and then I continued working there through college. So like I was 22 or something when that's when I quit, and I took that summer off to just climb really, and I started doing a little bit of guiding work with in the Alpine realm. Up until that point, it was mostly like doing some rock guiding with like some summer camps and like some other people like around Washington, but the big business there is in the Alpine. So I moved into Alpine guiding with my I guess we could say, minimal amount of alpine experience. I'd only climbed like 3 or 4 mountains by that point. And from there,
Can you
that,
say what separates alpine climbing from maybe like a traditional climbing?
oh yeah, I
Like
still
those
don't
gym
really have a
goers would
good,
be.
yeah, I don't have a good answer for that. But um, like the simplest answer is like difference between rock and alpine is above tree line, but that doesn't work for everywhere, and it doesn't really work for the style, so to speak. So like you can think of rock climbing as point to point, like anchor to anchor, fifth class climbing, which you can get in the Alpine, but maybe not super remote, as in like, you know, the approach only takes like up to an hour or so. And it's that fifth class element is all the way through. There's not a whole lot of sections of third or fourth class or rambly stuff. The rock quality tends to be better. And then bringing that into the alpine environment, that's adding in snow and ice for one, or glaciers. And you can, the style changes to more moving over easy terrain versus climbing the hard terrain. So you can have a lot of third, fourth class ridge lines. Um, you can have extended sections of fifth class in there, but if you have to go through the ice or the snow, or you have to hike in a far ways, or you have a lot of third and fourth to get there, then it's more of an alpine style thing. So
Yeah.
alpine just has a lot more elements than the rock world, I guess.
Yep.
Yeah, and so at that time, I think in college I climbed like, you know, Snowfield Peak, and I climbed Fisher Chimneys, and Baker was somewhere in there. And so like with that minimal amount of experience with an SPI, with a large amount of rock climbing experience, I got hired on with a few companies, actually having some connections too, because of Vertic World. I got hired on with a few companies, and just started the Alpine circuit of, you know, newer guide, not as much experience. I started with Baker, like guiding that a whole lot for that first season. But at that same time, I also already went through my rock guide course, which I did right out of college. And I went through my Alpine guide course somewhere in the mix there. And then because I had that training, they gave me a lot more leash early on. And so I was able to climb, or I was able to like kind of move through the mountaineering process and then get some more technical alpine climbing in there pretty fast. So that kind of helped out with the large amount of climbing in the area I did and the training.
Is there a separate certification for alpine guiding?
Yeah. So there's 3 certifications overall. And after you get all 3, then you're internationally certified. And not every country does it that way, but this is how a lot of the more first world oriented countries do it, or also how countries with the right terrain will do it.
Yeah.
And yeah, so
And sorry, who's
excuse
this?
me.
Who's our guest?
Yeah, this is Sky. She's in a
Hey,
lot of
Sky.
videos. Hey, Sky.
Beautiful.
She's here to bother me. Um, but yeah, so oh, there she goes. So yeah, you have 3 different certification tracks, and one is the rock guide, the other is alpine, and then the final is ski. And so different countries will have different avenues to get to the full IFMGA, which in America you have to get all 3 and then you get fully pinned, they say. And like for example, in Nepal, the avenues are quite different to get to that full certification, and they focus mostly on alpine, high altitude alpine, and then they have a small ski component in there. But there's not nearly as much emphasis placed on ski, and there's basically no emphasis on rock. And so that's based primarily on the terrain that they have in their country. And it's great because, you know, Nepal is like super poor country, and if you get that certification, you can go and work in any of the other countries and make a ton of money for Nepali standard.
Yeah.
And so it's great that they have that. But in America, we have those three main avenues, which is also common in other countries. Some countries only do alpine and ski, and then they add rock into the alpine. But in America, it makes a lot of sense to have the rock track because you have something like Red Rocks or Yosemite with a ton of guides working purely in rock terrain. So it makes logical sense why they would have that path. And so, looping back, right when I got out of college, I actually skipped the last week of college to take the rock guide course. And then I came
That's
back and
awesome.
graduated. Yeah, they gave me commission for it. And yeah, and then they came back and graduated, and then I started kind of around the Alpine track, and then I guess like around 2020 is when I got the rock guide cert, and 2023 is when I got my Alpine cert. So it just kind of kept going from there, and then I'm hoping by 2026 I'll have the ski cert. So my next step for that is the advanced ski course for me, which I'm planning to take in next spring.
Got it. Got it. Sound like that's awesome. And then back to the YouTube channel. How do you think your videos are different now than when you started?
Well, I guess you could say the editing and the camera work has gotten just a tiny bit better. But also my level of understanding of topics that I talk about has increased quite a bit.
Yeah.
Like, it's like the Bloom's taxonomy has this whole thing about it, which I don't know off the top of my head, but it's kind of like it starts with when you're learning a new skill, you have like monkey see, monkey do, and then you slowly morph into understanding the reasons behind that technique or that skill or whatever. And then from there, you can start to use that line of reasoning to push yourself into the next phase of developing the original skill. So
Yep.
it's like you got to know your audience a bit. Like there's some people where it's literally like, no, you do this because I tell you. And then that's as easy as it gets, which I guess we'll call that military level because that's like what the military is all about.
Yep.
And then it moves on to instructor level, and then I'm gonna say like committee level when you have a large amount of experienced people talking in a room, think tank, and developing reasoning for whatever. So, like, a good example of that would be the biggest one that comes to mind is glacier travel, and very specifically how you clip into the rope. So
Mm,
it's like people use two lockers. Well, why do you use two lockers? Because they told me to, and that's like
right.
basic Baker client right there. It's like, yeah, do this because I told you. And then, or you use a locker and a non-locker, doesn't matter. And then you get a lot of people coming out there with these directional triple action, triple action belay carabiners. And, it's like, oh, well, why can you use one of those versus the two of these? And they say, well, you you just can. That could be a reason. And then you can dive into the reasoning behind it. So that's where I've like come in with my videos where I may have not delved into the nuance of that when I was becoming an Alpine guide or going through the process or just didn't have as much experience. Whereas nowadays, I can make much more deep dive videos into that. And that's where the talking point videos come into play, which a
Yeah.
lot of people seem to like. Stuff like you can't, or like why we don't use third hands when we're pelling with a gree, or the two carabiner thing, or what else did I
Yeah.
do? Girth hitching slings to your belay loop. Like what the deal is with that. So that's the biggest change in my videos. And then understanding of equipment beyond that too, like making a video about ice screws or cans or ATCs where I talk about them and very subtle nuances that I've learned about using them throughout a bunch of years in a variety of different contexts. And I feel like there's not a lot of talk about that in general, but also there's definitely not a lot of talk about that on YouTube. Like, just from the different people that are out there, there's a lot of folks that are kind of narrow into their one field, or a
Yeah.
lot of people that just don't understand gear really well at all. And so I can help throw that out there to get people thinking a bit more.
Yeah, I agree with that. Your videos are great for very in-depth overviews and detailed explanations of systems as far as the technical side of climbing goes and alpine climbing.
Yeah, thank you.
On the other side, I see your Instagram, you don't share so much of like short form content related to your channel. Is there a reason you don't push so much of your knowledge on Instagram side?
I think part of that is because I can only really handle one form of social media at a time.
Yeah,
Yeah, I'm not really that good Instagram and stuff. And then also I feel like when I'm like guiding the same route over and over, I think it's just boring. And
yep,
so yeah, that was a big feature. I know some people are out there like, oh, another lap of this, another lap of that, or whatever. And I've just never really been that great about it. Um, Also, it's just like those Instagram tech tips are great for what they are, tech tips. And I've made a few like, oh, look at this weird anchor. I did like a weird anchor while I was in the Baker Seracs one time, and I made
yeah,
a video about it. I remember that, and I put it on Instagram. But it is short form, potato chip content, and
yeah,
so that's not really where I work the best. I need time to talk and explain about things.
yep,
And that's where YouTube is great.
yeah,
And then also it's like saturated. There's like tons of people out there, and you could take the great part about it is the examples. So if you watch Dale Rinsberg, he has a million examples of doing like one type of anchor, but with like a tiny nuance in there. And that can be really great. So if you watch like, 50 of his anchor videos, then you can see different nuances, which he points out in the video, apart from this or that. And then he also challenges a bit of the ethos out there with like, well, why are we doing lockers here and this and that? So um, that can be pretty cool. But there is a lot of people out there making the same content. And there are times where I also feel like they're like, oh, check out this interesting anchor. And I'm like, well, that doesn't seem like the most appropriate anchor for the situation.
mm,
And I think part of that is how many people are coming into Instagram boasting about, I mentioned it already, the like the girth hitch master point anchor. And everyone's all about that right now, but I'm like, well, you could have, actually just tied your anchor in a knot, and you would have had your master point higher, and it would have been a more effective anchor. So it's like um on Instagram, and not everyone's doing this, but there is a good carry away culture with that one. And
yeah,
yeah, especially with the people that are new to the scene, like new professionals, and people that aren't professionals but are really into stuff. And then they'll post about like, oh, check out this cool trick, but it's like, no, you should like that cool trick is not effective in this situation, and that just takes mileage and time. So, not
yeah,
saying that someone who's not a professional could make really good tech tips, but you got to be out there. You got to really do a lot of it to understand and get a feel for that nuance.
yeah. That makes sense. What I do find on your Instagram though is you're always sharing books you recommend.
Yep, and
You're a
that was
pretty
my
prolific reader, man.
yeah, that was my response to all the tech tips. Is like more people should be reading. and
Oh yeah,
And one thing I should clear up too is I did not read all those books like back to back and then post about them, because I was just talking to my mom about this. She seemed to think that I read all those books like, today or whatever. And she's
yeah,
like, "Are you like skimming them or something?" But no, I like in the last number of years I've read these books. And then I continue to read books, and I'm like, well,
oh,
no
I
one's
had the same
talking about.
impression. I was like, this guy's a voracious reader, man. He's just
Yeah,
cruising through
I
these.
guess, yeah, that was an issue of, or I should clear that one up, is like I'm actually a really slow reader. I think I'm like your average to below average speed of reader.
Yeah.
But I do read a decent amount. I go through about 30-ish books a year or something. Some years are more or less or whatever, but um, there's a lot that I like to read about, and climbing is obviously a big one. And I
Yeah.
feel like you can learn a lot from them too. Like not so much accidents in North America, or what's the other one AAC makes, like or whatever those other ones are. You can learn from those. Don't get me wrong; those are great. But specific books or just anything really can apply to the outdoor world. Things like Deep Survival is a great one. I think everyone should read that. But it's a lot of these climbing books, you can kind of learn a good amount from them, and then they can inspire you also. Like if you're just a sport climber, it's hard to read about mountaineering, but reading minus 148 is pretty cool story no matter what. So it's I don't know, I feel like more people should read stuff, especially if they're trying to learn about climbing, and
Yeah.
not just like your lame, this is like how you track climb book, like an actual like story book.
Right. How many of those of you said like 60 books a year, you think?
No, like 30.
30, 30 books a year? How many do you think are climbing related?
Oh, definitely. There's some years where I read more climbing related than other, but probably about 50%.
Okay.
Like
Yeah.
I actually this is really funny. I read a lot of books about dog sledding.
Oh yeah. Have you ever done it?
No. But yeah, funny enough, there's actually a lot of content out there for dog sledding. So
Yeah.
I think it's the Alaska, the winter, the crazy conditions that they're working in. That's what I like reading about. Um, and then there's another one. There's this author out there called Nick Jans. I think it's Nick Jans. No, sorry, it's John Balzar. I had his book just right down there. But he has written some really interesting books about the Yukon and dog sledding and stuff. And it's cool because he travels to the locations like your standard. I don't think it's investigative journalist, but like
Yeah.
you go to a
Investigative dog sledder.
location, yeah, and then you write about an event or people or something like that. And me personally, I would love to do that one day. So I just need to find the right topic to really write about. But I read a lot of
Yeah.
those sort of books.
You write a bit yourself. I've read a few of your blog posts on your website.
Yeah, and that's not exactly everything I've written too. Like I like to write about stories and stuff in my life. I just haven't like put anything out there.
Hmm.
But that's like, yeah, me dipping my toe into the writing scene a little bit.
Yeah.
And those
'Cause I
stemmed
was gonna
off
say
of
your blog posts are very technical too, or lean more on the technical side than the
the
blog.
story. Yeah.
Yeah, the blog side.
Yeah. And part of that is I was originally paid to write those blogs for a guide service I work for. And those blogs are on their website too.
Mm,
But I was like, well, I'm going to put these on my website. So I uploaded them there as well. And so that's why it was kind of like, winter layering systems was one of them. And I just wrote it in the style that you would expect to see a blog post in like a guide service website sort of thing.
yeah,
And yeah, same deal with pretty much all the other ones except for the why aren't climbing gyms hiring climbers thing,
yeah,
which that one was a bit more of a piece. I wrote that one way back in college, I think, and I just sat with it forever. But I think it was partially out of a little bit of um, I was just a little PO'd about the industry lately, climbing in different climbing gyms. And you get belay tests from people that clearly don't lead climb, like, or a lead test from, a person that, and I was just kind of like, what is going on here? And
yeah.
I mellowed out since then. But
I've I've always thought that's an interesting balance for gyms to strike between being approachable to newcomers, but being enough of a barrier to entry that those who do come who are new understand it's a sport with a lot of risks.
yeah, and different gyms will handle that different ways.
Yeah.
And yeah, probably some ways are better than others, but um, I have a whole rant about this I don't want to get into, or you probably don't want me to get into, but gyms are just falling back on policy more than training for their employees. And you can definitely have it where it's like, and some gyms struggle with this. My gym in my area is really struggling with hiring people that even know how to lead climb. That's like
Mm,
becoming a requirement for the job, is like must be able to lead climb so that way you can do lead checks and stuff.
right.
And it's a big barrier for gym staff, is that lead climbing aspect, because they get a lot of people coming in that are new to the industry. And it's understandable that you don't want to just like get out there on the sharp end, like you got to be kind of ready for it. Me
Yep.
personally, it took me a while to get into that headspace of like leading, even in the gym, like
Yep.
when I was growing up. And so I understand it. And gyms are falling back more on policy to avoid the decision making aspect of the job. So, like, if you take it to higher level stuff like guiding, a huge amount of it is all decision based in the moment, make, those possible higher level decisions. And that's just the way it has to be. You can't write policy for how you guide the Fisher chimneys. And so, um, you understandably have a higher level of entry to that, and then you have more experienced people there. Whereas gyms don't have the luxury of hiring only the most experienced people. So they are an entry level job, just like REI or any other outdoor store. And so
Yeah.
you hire entry level employees, and everyone has to start somewhere. So it's a great place to start if you want to get into the outdoor industry. um, but then that provides some barriers for them. And like, how do you teach someone to make those decisions without any experience? Is you default on policy. And then now it's like, oh well, I've leg climbed here or there outside at this crag. And it's like, well, you haven't leg climbed in a gym, so you're not going to take the test. Something like that helps to take the guesswork and the nervousness out of it. And then a big part of it is also insurance, which I'm sure insurance for gyms is way different than insurance for any company that works outside. And it's probably in some ways a lot more stringent. So that
Yeah.
can be another hurdle that I don't understand.
Right.
Yeah, so it's the gym industry is now moving towards this whole lesser experience, more policy driven things. And then that can be good and bad. The bad being that all of a sudden it restricts the general population within that gym, and to a great extent too. Like, I haven't been able to be lead checked at a gym yet, or at one of the gyms I used to climb at, because I wasn't there during the one time you could take your lead check. It was like they just assigned an hour period or whatever where you have to sign up for it.
Yeah. Yeah. I get that. Do you see yourself ever writing a book of your own then? Is that an ambition of yours?
Yeah, kind of. I see myself right. I have a few different ideas for books. Definitely like in the more technical realm, and then in the more storytelling realms, actually.
Yeah.
Yeah, like technical realm being I felt like the ski patrol, there's not a lot of good textbook manual type stuff to talk about ski patrol.
Hmm.
And so the National Ski Patrol has like this one book that's out, but I think they kind of, sorry, National Ski Patrol, I think they did a pretty bad job with it, really. And I was like, oh, I could write a better book than this. So, like, just sort of your standard, like the version of the Mountain Guide's manual for ski patrol.
Yeah.
And then I always obviously had an idea for writing a book about mountain guiding in general. That would be split into your main sections: rock, ice, alpine, ski sort of deal, and would have a bit more of, it would dive a bit more into the craft than something like the Mountain Guide manual. Mountain Guide Manual is great for the transitions and for other technical aspects, but they understandably had to keep it more public based. Whereas this book would be more of a labor of love, not going to make me a ton of money, but be more guiding based and involve a deeper dive into short roping, short pitching, and how to teach a snow school, stuff like that, which
Yeah,
isn't really a thing in the Mountain Guide Manual.
yeah.
Yeah, so like those are two kind of technical ideas, and then just writing a book about different things I've done, like park rangers will do and stuff like that. So I've always kind of wanted to do that, but I need to have enough weird stuff happen to me. So at this point, I only have like 5 real chapters of extra weird things that have happened that
Did you,
yeah, that I could
did you
put
tease
together.
one of the chapters? What's a weird thing that's happened to you?
Oh, and now I got to think about it. I guess one time when I was soloing Touchstone in Zion, I wrote I guess you could say a chapter about that. And like I don't know how familiar you are with that route, but
Mm-mm.
everyone rappels down the main route. And I was like up there a few times and I'm like, well, why does everyone just rappel down the route? It says right here in the book, like there's a descent. And so I was up there and I finally got my haul bag up the last pitch and I was going to do the descent rather than rappelling the route. And I learned why people rappel the route. Like, if you were to ask me nowadays, I'd be like, yeah, I just rappel the route. So
Is
that
the
was like the
descent
whole
just a
thing.
horrible scramble down?
Sandy, scramble, bunch of rappels. I was alone and I had my haul bag. And the final 2 rappels, they say you can do it in with 160-meter. You actually need 2. So that's that was a whole thing. And
Yeah,
it took me like 3 to 4 hours to get off that mountain. And it's like a tiny little feature too. It's only like 1,500 feet. And it took me like 4 hours to get off of it. It's like that descent was really something. And then pair that with being super tired because it was the first wall I ever soloed. And
yeah.
so yeah, I was just really tired from hauling and from like jugging a lot. And yeah, it was just like an interesting deal.
What's the most scared or nervous you've been climbing?
Hmm. Yeah. Well, you can always think about like the times when you're learning to trad climb and you're like really scared, but you're actually totally fine.
Yeah.
Um, that's the most scared or nervous I've been, huh? That one's
Has
a
it
real
been a
fun
bit
one.
for you? Like, I imagine you're out there all the time.
It's been a bit. I mean, like
Yeah,
since moving to California, a lot of the routes have been very straightforward, and I haven't really been nervous about them. Um,
yeah.
oh, I guess when have I been really scared? I don't know. There was a time in my life where I've been slab climb. I was really into slab climbing, and I
Oh,
would
yeah.
climb in Washington at a place called Darrington, which had these massive slab routes, like granite domes. And like for the most part, they were pretty well protected, but every now and again, you'd have like some mental thing to deal with, and you really have to trust your feet because it's like feet, hands pasted on the wall, and you're like, I just don't know how I'm going to get there.
Yep.
But you just keep on smearing your way up. So that's always been pretty scary. Maybe this one climb in the Cochise called Absinthe Mallet or Malay. I don't know if it's French. And I was climbing it with my sister, and it was like pretty slabby, pretty slippery, and there were sections of pretty big run out. I remember the second pitch, you climb right off the belay like 10 feet, and then you blindly place a cam in a crack. They said like a number 1 cam, like reach over to the left, and then you had to commit to the crux, just like right off the belay. So that was like, we were both kind of unnerved at that. That was like a decently scary one. I took like a whipper on it too, because she had like a bunch of slack out, so I fell like 20 or something feet.
Oh
Uh,
my gosh.
yeah, so like after that, the mental game was a little fried, and like the final pitch was like 2 bolts to protect the like 2 bolts in the first like 40 feet, and then the rest you're like on your own. And it's like, why
Yeah.
couldn't you place a few more bolts? So I remember that one being kind of unnerving. And
How do you deal with nerves personally versus in your guide capacity, where a client is going to be has Elvis leg and is terrified to move up or down?
yeah, that's a very case by case thing. I did just work a school group, not school, like summer camp group. Um, and like it was single pitch, and like a girl was like nervous, she wasn't going down well, and I literally
Yeah,
just climbed right up and lower, like right to her, and then like
right,
attached ourselves and went down. So
right.
like very East Coast. But that one was pretty easy because she wasn't like listening. She was like, she wasn't listening. She was nervous. She was scared. And she just like wouldn't do anything other than just like slowly work her way down Spider-Man crawl. But it was like, you give them so much comfort if you're just right there with them.
Yep.
And then once I was there, she was like, oh, okay. And then like sat down and whatever. So that's like the easiest problem to deal with. Um, Route selection, I guess that's the biggest thing. If you talk to someone and they're like really scared of climbing, you're not going to bring them up on a really big route. So, uh,
Smart.
yeah, I
Yeah.
guess that's the prior prevention is really the big thing.
Yeah.
And then you can work with them too. Like if they're trying to, it depends on what type of climber they are. You can get someone who would freak out on a two pitch, like really small. Maybe it's a single pitch that you broke it up into two pitches to really
Yeah.
help them out, and they would freak out. But then you could bring them to the top of Sahale Peak just because of their comfort level in terrain. So if they're more of a mountaineer, they've been mountaineering, and that was fine, but they can't really rock climb. You bring them up the Quien Sabe Glacier, which has like two-ish pitches of quote rock climbing. It's like rock scrambling, fourth class, and they would get to the top and feel super great and then get a little bit of rock under them, but they would be in actually an environment that's a bit more comforting than possibly a rock world. It really depends on the client and what they want to do, I guess. Like if they're willing to pay for Sahale versus a half a day of rock climbing. So
Yeah.
yeah, a lot of that plays into it.
Is there a sense now that you have with more guiding experience of how far you can push a client, or if a client wants to be pushed
It
to sorry, go
yeah,
ahead.
that one's always tough. Um, yeah, always tough. You can get away with pushing them a little bit,
Yeah.
but you can't have them completely shut down. And so I guess a good method is when they start hesitating, you check in with them. And then when they're like, oh, I don't know, you're like, well, let's go up 10 more feet. And if you go up 10 more feet and they're like, I still don't know, then we can just call it. That's
Yeah.
like an easy way to do it. I had a client recently who was like, he originally threw out this route that was like a really long route. It was star starlight arret. That's not right. It was on Temple Crag. Um and he was like, yeah, let's go for it. And then we had like a big day climbing Sill the first day, and he was like, I don't know, I'm feeling kind of nervous about it. And this is just back at camp the day before. And so I'm like, well, okay, let's just like chill out a bit, rest, and see what's up. And then after an hour or so, he was like, I'm still don't know about it. And I'm like, well, if you don't know about it now, you're not going to know about it like early tomorrow. So we dialed that one back and climbed an easier, smaller route called Venusian Blind. And he had a great day. It was awesome. So
Yeah.
yeah, like especially with those bigger objectives with higher end folks, like you really can get yourself trapped. And it doesn't matter how much you want it, because I wanted to climb the new route. I hadn't done it before.
Right.
But yeah, it doesn't matter how much you want it. You got to just sort of go off of them. So it's an ever evolving practice, and it's really hard. And there are a lot of factors out of your control, especially the money aspect. Like Everest, and all these 8,000-meter peaks have this problem. Like I paid the money, I should get up there, and
Mm,
like that can be a really hard one when you tell people, no, we're going down.
right.
And yeah, So, like, I actually had this group a while back with another guide on Baker, and just by watching them walk up the trail, we were like, no, we don't really want to. We definitely don't want to be on the upper mountain with these folks, but we can still take them a little ways up, but like no way, we don't want to be on the upper mountain. So we kind of played a card. It snowed a little the night before, so we hiked up there and was like, oh, I don't know, the avalanche conditions are pretty bad, so we're gonna go down. And they
Yeah,
didn't even understand the environment they were in. Like they thought it was a snow hike, and like someone dropped their axe at one point, it slid down a little slope, and they're like, "Oh, I can just run down and get it." I'm like, "No, there's like crevasses. Like you can fall into a crevasse." And it just didn't like they just thought it was like, "Oh no, I'm really good on snow. I can walk on snow." And I'm
right,
like, "No, it's like that's not the point."
right,
And she did the same argument. She's like, "Well, I don't really ever use crampons, so what about this?" And I'm like, "We're using crampons, like this isn't just like a snowy hike. This is
right.
like,
Like, why hire a guide if you're just gonna
yeah,
not
yeah,
listen to
totally."
anything we say?
So, like that can be another big problem is like sometimes the hardest groups are the ones that think they know a lot.
Yeah,
Where, yeah, like they think that they know a lot, and that can be kind of hard to manage that sort of group.
yeah. Speaking of think they know a lot, what's your relationship like with comment sections on YouTube and Instagram?
Oh, that's a great transition. Sorry. um, I have a rule. I don't respond to a lot of bad comments, I guess, negative ones. Um, there was this one guy who was my favorite commenter. He stopped commenting, which made me sad, but every time I made a video, he would tell me how much I'm doing wrong. And yeah, like
Your number
this
one
clearly
hater.
shows, and like the best line was like, this clearly shows a lack of understanding of alpinism slash ice climbing. And I'm like, it was like the best thing to read every time. I look forward to them, but he stopped commenting. I never responded. That was probably the issue. He like wanted to fight with someone.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, I've gotten into it a few times before. Like I think some of the hardest comments to respond to are people that miss the point of the video, and then you can't seem to get them on the right track. Like, or a big thing in climbing in general, and these more complex things is people focus in on one aspect, right? And so this wasn't even a comment from me. This was like some guy's TikTok where he was doing a multi-pitch belay, and he's like, "This is how we multi-pitch belay." A few of you were asking, and he's doing the super old school redirect through the anchor top rope belay style thing, which I guess that it works. It's by no means the most efficient or effective method, but it does work. And so I'm like, this guy's going to get ripped apart in the comments, and I like that's the time to actually look at him, right? And
Yeah.
so you're going through and you're looking at all the comments, like all this, like, oh, you should be doing this, you should be doing that. Like that girl is not on belay at all, which she was. So, um, but then everyone was focusing in on his anchor in that he didn't use lockers on both the bolts. And I was like, what a strange thing to like, well, everything's kind of okay. The only thing I would add is to do lockers on both your bolts. And it's like,
So if
what?
this big like macro miss, but then these micro like
Yeah,
highlights.
these micro nitpicks that
Yeah.
don't even like don't even matter. And it's like, yeah, sure, everyone's putting lockers on their bolts nowadays. If you want to do that, it's like fine, no power, more power to you. But it's like they're they're zooming in on one little thing, and it's like if you zoom in on the right little thing, then it can matter a lot. But like what they're doing is just like it really doesn't matter. And I thought that was an interesting thing. Or I watched another video from a different guy where he tied his clove hitch wrong. It's still safe in that it would hold him, but he added an extra twist. And then I was just wondering, like, oh, did anyone catch this? And going down in the comments, everyone's like complaining about other weird stuff, and no one even noticed that he tied his clove hitch wrong. And
Huh.
so, yeah, that's the big issue with YouTube and stuff. Like sometimes people post these things and they're like, how would you improve it or whatever, and everyone misses the actual big thing. And Mountain Project's huge for this. Like, Mountain Project's the worst place you could possibly go to ask anything. Like, you would just, it's like all the most toxic people in the world are sitting on that one. So it's really tough in the internet game. And I deal with those comments all the time where um, I like someone messages something, and sometimes they feel like, it feels like they're really coming from a point of questioning and they're really worried. And then if you explain it to them, then they're okay. But other times they just double down. And so the big thing is actually the fixed point. Is that what I called them? Fixed point belay series I made on how to belay a leader directly off the anchor in certain circumstances. And first off, you got a lot of people saying, well, why wouldn't you just use your ATC in guide mode? And it's like, they didn't get the point of, this is the belaying the leader, not the follower. And then you got other people that are like arguing about the equalization of the anchor and stuff like that. And um yeah, that can, like, I try to, like, well, it's like I already explained this in the video, but like, it's like this and that. And then sometimes they're kind of, or most of the time I'd say they're like, oh, okay, yeah, I understand. And other times they just double down. And if I do like 2 or 3 responses, then and then it's like getting worse and worse, that's kind of when I call it quits. So I just let them end the conversation there, because there's not even any point to continue past that. And that's only happened a few times, I would say. The rest of the time, people are kind of like, want to have more of a conversation versus like hear me say that I got it wrong.
Yeah,
I'm happy to admit I get stuff wrong. I do it all the time. I like call something the wrong name,
right.
or what else? I got something wrong a little bit ago, which I don't remember now. But like, I'm totally fine with saying I got something wrong, but I'll I try to do my research a lot on these things, and I don't
Yeah,
really
it shows, man. The videos are so well, they're so dense full of knowledge.
dense
You
full.
can almost
Yeah,
pause every 30 seconds and like scribble down something if you're really trying to take notes of what's going on.
yeah, and you can watch them a few times too. That always helps. Like, that's how
Yeah,
I absorbed a lot of stuff in video content, is I have to watch it a few times.
yeah, yeah, and your videos are very evergreen too. Like I've pulled up ones from a few years ago, just looking up how to do something.
Yeah, it's yeah, some of them I haven't really, I've only wanted to change for the production content versus
Yeah.
more of the like the tactics may have changed. There was one actually with the GG where at first they recommended to rappel with it this way, and then they changed it. And so I got a comment on the video, and I looked into it, and I realized they changed the way how they recommend to rappel with it. And so I made a new video about that.
Hmm.
So I actually had to update something, and I wouldn't have got it without someone commenting on the video. So it it is pretty cool when something like that happens.
Do you get nervous about posting at all?
Yeah, I have in the past.
Yeah.
Um, just because I knew there would be backlash. There was one video in particular that I posted. Not going to say what it is, but I was worried that, or I kind of knew that there would be some backlash involved, and then there was, and so I ended up taking it down. So I'd like don't really want any of that on the channel. I don't want to call out other people. Um, actually, going back to kind of like
It would be a
the,
funny transition if you just went into drama farming.
I know, right? Just like try to like piss as many people off as I could.
Yeah.
But um, like going into that oversaturation thing I said with Instagram, YouTube is kind of approaching that point of oversaturation of um, things that don't really matter in the long run. And this is actually going back also to focusing in on the wrong thing or making a big deal out of a small micro part of the system. And so with all the information that's out there, I'm getting more and more comments on my videos about especially the strength of equipment or specific techniques in a specific style, and they're like, well, does this change your opinion on something? And no, it doesn't really change my opinion because that
Yeah.
can be fixed by X, Y, and Z. Or the big thing that's been floating around lately has been like, if you tie a knot in a sling, it reduces its strength by 50%. And it's just not that simple. It depends on the knot, it depends on the material, it depends on how bulky the knot is in the material. So I bet you like an overhand in a Dyneema sling reduces it by like 50%. But a figure eight in a nylon sling, it's probably less than 50% that it reduces it with. And then when you add that in with a BHK, like you probably like just the fact that the bends aren't as tight. It's the tighter the bend, the more that weakens the material. The wider the bend, the less it'll weaken the material. And so it's kind of like people are again focusing in on this thing. It does weaken the material. That is totally true, but
Yeah.
um, like we've known this for years, and the techniques haven't changed because of that knowledge. And that's the reason why the strength is what it is, and that's the reason why we have the techniques that we use is to combat these things that science has brought to light. And
Yep.
I feel like that's affecting some people where they have this knowledge of whatever, based on some source that they've found, because there's so many sources out there. And then they're using that to make more dangerous techniques in the mountains or techniques that are completely inappropriate for the situation, which could add more danger. And that's, it's just like moving backwards at that point. And so that's where you could hire a guide, or you could just buy a $20 book and look at what they recommend in that book, because
Right.
those people that write the books, they have to do a ton of research on it. And that's a big missing component in resource checking in the industry is like, you don't have to spend, $400 to hire me. You can like spend $30 on a book and at least get on the right track for your thought process. But
Or do both.
yeah, yeah, or both. Actually,
Yeah, there
both
you
would
go.
probably be
Yeah.
best. So that's a huge thing that's going on in the YouTube scene that I know what to do with. And it's
Hey,
been a thing with climbing forever too, with these fads, maybe not the right word, but stuff like simul rappelling. Everyone was on simul rappelling for so long, and then actual research came out with it and stories, and now everyone's like destroying simul rappelling. But I actually just made a video about this where I was talking about considerations and appropriate times to use it, because there's
yeah.
plenty of non-appropriate times to use it too. You see tons of people doing weird stuff out there. Um, but yeah, it's just part of that saturation in the market, with all these different resources going out there now. Like literally anyone can just make a resource.
Yeah.
So,
Hey, will you do a quick speed round with me for wrap up questions?
oh yeah, sure.
Cool. Okay. Tea or coffee?
Coffee,
Cats or dogs?
cats, the cats.
Oh, that one coming. ATC or Gree?
That one's kind of a tough one. I guess ATC, just based off of what I do for the most
Yeah.
part. Yeah.
Any hobbies outside of, I'm going to say climbing, skiing, or alpine hiking that you have or interests?
I mean, I have started paddle boarding a bit, but
Nice.
yeah, I guess reading also counts as a hobby to
Yeah,
some
definitely.
people.
And historical figure you'd most like to have dinner with?
That's a tough one. Maybe Ben Franklin,
Oh, good
actually.
answer.
Yeah, like I climb mountains. He devised the continental postal system. We'd have a lot to talk about.
Yeah. Yeah, ambassador to France.
We're gonna talk about that.
Yeah. Yeah, and where can people find you? Where you have your YouTube, your Instagram?
Yeah, my YouTube is just my name, Ryan Tilley. You can also Instagram is RTILLSON _. It's an old climbing nickname, Artilson. Um, And
And what's
then
the best way for people to find you as a guide?
you can go to my website. It's just Ryan Tilley Mountain Guide, and I have like a contact me page on there. So that's probably, or you could do Instagram. That works just as fine.
Awesome. Well, this was super fun, Ryan. Thanks, man.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's the second podcast I've ever been on. Feeling super pro.
Yeah, it was great. That's this episode of Outliers. Thanks so much for Ryan for joining, and thank you for listening. Be sure to check out Ryan's socials. They're in the description. Be sure to hit subscribe so you don't miss future interviews.